Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I had just finished attending my best friend's wedding in Asheville, North Carolina. As the maid of honor, I'd spent the last week helping with all the final preparations, from emergency dress alterations to calming pre-wedding jitters. It was exhausting but worth it to see my friend of 20 years have her perfect day. I was finally heading back home to Virginia, about a 6-hour drive ahead of me. The weather was perfect for driving, clear skies, minimal traffic, and I had my favorite road trip playlist keeping me company. I was actually enjoying the peaceful drive, something rare for me since I usually hate long car trips. Everything was going fine until I reached an intersection about an hour into my journey. I had a green light and was driving through when suddenly this silver SUV came barreling toward me from the right side, completely ignoring their red light. I barely had time to process what was happening before the impact hit. My car flipped over completely and I found myself hanging upside down, held in place by my seatbelt. The pain in my leg was immediate and intense, and I could feel warm blood trickling down my arm from where glass had cut into it. Firefighters had to pull me out through the sunroof since my leg was broken and I couldn't move. Thank God I had opted for a car with one, or this could have been much worse. When I sat in a chair while paramedics worked on removing glass from my arm, the driver of the other car put on quite a show. She started screaming about her leg, dramatically wailing that she was dying while rolling around on the ground like she was auditioning for a soap opera. A paramedic walked over to check on her, and suddenly, her performance came to an abrupt end. The paramedic told her that she was completely fine and didn't even have a bruise. She refused to accept this, arguing that she could have internal bleeding and demanding a second opinion. When the paramedic tried to reassure her again, she just kept insisting it was unacceptable. After realizing she wasn't getting anywhere with her injury claims, she stormed over to where I was being treated. Mind you, the paramedic was still pulling pieces of glass from my arm. She started yelling at me, claiming that I had hit her car and ruined her kid's day. When I questioned this in confusion, she insisted it was true. The irony was that her car only had a dent in the front while mine was completely totaled. Also, there weren't any kids in her car. She was alone. The paramedic tried to intervene, asking her to leave me alone and telling her she could talk to the officers later. I pointed out how delusional she was being, especially after her fake broken leg performance. This really set her off, and she started screaming that I was the one faking it and claiming she was the real victim. What happened next was both shocking and painful. Without any warning, she grabbed my wrist and yanked me up from the chair, forcing me to put weight on my broken leg. The pain was excruciating, and when she let go, I lost my balance. I fell backward onto the chair, which tipped over, causing my head to slam against the pavement. Everything after that became a blur. Through my dazed state, I could hear her screaming about her non-existent children and threatening to sue everyone. The police officers who had been documenting the accident scene immediately stepped in. One officer told her to put her hands behind her back, informing her she was under arrest for assault. She tried to resist, threatening them with her supposed lawyer husband. When another officer pointed out that she had just assaulted an injured person in front of multiple witnesses, including law enforcement, she started yelling about her kids again. The first officer had to remind her that she had been alone in the vehicle and tell her to stop lying. They handcuffed her while she continued her tantrum. I was quickly transported to the hospital, where they treated my concussion, set my broken leg, and properly cleaned and bandaged the cuts on my arm. I ended up having to stay in North Carolina for 2 extra days because the doctors wouldn't clear me to drive with a concussion and a broken leg. My co-worker, who's also one of my closest friends, drove down from Virginia to pick me up. During those 2 days, I learned that Karen had quite a record of similar incidents. Apparently, this wasn't her first attempt at insurance fraud. She had 3 previous accusations of deliberately causing accidents and trying to blame the other driver. The police found footage from a nearby traffic camera that clearly showed her running the red light and speeding. Combined with her assault on me and her history of fraud attempts, the district attorney decided to pursue criminal charges alongside my civil lawsuit. The insurance company declared my car a total loss and, thanks to the video evidence, approved my claim without any pushback. My lawyer tells me Karen is facing charges for assault, reckless driving, and attempting to commit insurance fraud. She's looking at potential jail time, especially given her prior history. Her husband isn't actually a lawyer. He's a real estate agent. And when he found out about this incident, he apparently filed for divorce. Turns out this was the last straw in a long line of similar situations she'd put him through. I was a military commander in charge of about 80 soldiers in Hawaii. Most of my soldiers were great, hard-working people who just wanted to do their jobs and get paid. But there was this one soldier, let's call her Karen, who was nothing but trouble from day one. It started when I took over command and found out Karen had just had some medical procedure done. We were about to leave for Thailand in a week, and I needed to make sure everyone was fit to travel. When I asked her about it, she insisted she was fine. 2 days after arriving in Thailand, I get called to our medical tent. Karen's there, writhing in pain. The doctor tells me she has the worst case of pelvic inflammatory disease he's ever seen. No problem though. We had antibiotics to treat it. I assigned a female sergeant to keep an eye on her and make sure she takes her medication. The next day, the sergeant finds me and tells me 2 things. Karen's refusing to take her antibiotics, and she wants out of the military. So I had a chat with her. I reminded her that she still had a couple years left on her contract. She acknowledged this but insisted she was done being a soldier and wanted out. I told her I could make that happen, explaining that if she didn't want to be there, I didn't want her there either. But I laid out the deal. She needed to follow the rules, take her antibiotics, do her job, and show up when she was supposed to. I promised to start the paperwork for an honorable discharge as soon as we got back to Hawaii. She agreed to these terms. Spoiler alert, she couldn't. For the rest of our time in Thailand, she disappeared whenever she was supposed to take her meds. The sergeant had to hunt her down every single time. She even accused our first sergeant of assaulting her, which was easily proven false since he didn't have her infection. When we got back to Hawaii, I started working on her discharge papers, thinking it would be easier to just let her go than deal with punishing her first. She started acting even worse. She got caught drinking underage at 19. She and her husband forged documents to get free housing on base that they weren't qualified for. She stopped showing up for work completely. And get this, I got a call from a temp agency asking if it was okay for her to work for them in town. The audacity of this woman. I warned her that she was risking a court-martial, but she just couldn't help herself. She kept pushing boundaries, so I decided to push back. I canceled her honorable discharge and started the court-martial process. Her military lawyer came to talk to me, acting all high and mighty when I tried to warn him about her behavior. He didn't listen. My legal advisor told me Karen met all 5 conditions to be confined before her trial. So at our pre-trial meeting, I laid out the case, and boom, the judge ordered her to be confined in the Navy prison. When we went to pick her up from her housing, she and her husband were, let's say, busy. They made us wait while they finished, and she took her sweet time getting ready. That turned out to be important later. She spent 4 weeks in that cold prison. During that time, her husband got kicked out of the military dishonorably and left the island. He also fraudulently bought a van and abandoned it. Even better, we found out he'd stolen military equipment and explosives from other soldiers. Then we got the news. Karen was pregnant. From that day, we picked her up. She couldn't stay in confinement anymore because of it. Her lawyer promised she'd behave until we could send her home. But of course, she didn't. She smoked in the barracks, had alcohol in her room, still underage, and kept running off. When I called her in to discuss her behavior, she got cocky. I confronted her about violating her release agreement, mentioning her sneaking out, smoking, and drinking. She sarcastically added that she was doing all kinds of drugs too. I then pointed out that she was pregnant, explaining that most fetal damage from alcohol and smoking happens in the first few weeks. I told her that at the rate she was going, regardless of whether she planned to keep it, the baby would be born dumber than her. She immediately ran to my boss to complain about me, supposedly calling her stupid. Her lawyer called me, trying to sound outraged. He couldn't believe that I would use such language and call her names. I sarcastically asked if he was also appalled and dismayed. He stumbled over his words but insisted that I couldn't talk to soldiers like that. I clarified that I hadn't called her stupid, just stated facts about fetal development. When I asked what he wanted, he inquired what it would take to keep our deal. I told him to get her on a plane tomorrow. He managed to get her a flight 3 days early. I assigned an officer to escort her to the airport and make sure she actually got on the plane. He stayed until it took off. We weren't taking any chances. A month later, we found her husband's abandoned van in the parking lot with all 4 tires slashed. Perfect ending to the whole mess. My best friend of 15 years turned into someone I barely recognize, and it all started when I married my husband 6 months ago. We met in college, both struggling art students, sharing dreams over cheap coffee and even cheaper ramen. While I pursued my passion for design and eventually started my own small graphic design company, she chose to focus on her social media presence, convinced she'd be the next big influencer. We supported each other through thick and thin, or at least I thought we did. Everything changed after my wedding. My husband built his fortune through tech startups, and while we live comfortably, we're pretty low-key about it. No flashy cars or massive mansion, just a nice house in a good neighborhood, and the freedom to not worry about bills. 2 weeks after we returned from our honeymoon, my friend invited me for coffee at our usual spot. I should have known something was off when she ordered the most expensive drink on the menu and gave me a pointed look. She started off by asking me how married life was treating me. I tried to tell her it was great and that we were still settling in, but she cut me off before I could finish. She said she'd been thinking about something and reminded me how long we'd been friends and how she'd always been there for me. She pulled out a folder from her expensive bag, a bag I later learned she'd put on credit, expecting me to pay for it. She told me she'd drafted up what she called a little agreement to ensure our friendship stayed strong. When I asked her what she meant by an agreement, she explained that since I was basically rich now, she thought it was only fair that I help support my best friend. She even had the nerve to ask what the point of having money was if I couldn't share it. She slid over a document titled Friendship Support Agreement. I'm not joking. This thing was 5 pages long, with actual sections and clauses. She wanted a monthly allowance of $5,000 for maintaining an appropriate lifestyle befitting our friendship status, annual all-expenses-paid luxury vacations, and a $50,000 severance package if our friendship ended. When I asked if this was a joke, she got defensive and said she didn't look like she was joking. She claimed she'd supported me emotionally for years, and now it was my turn to support her financially, insisting it was only fair. I questioned how any of this could be considered fair. She responded by listing all the ways she'd been my emotional support system for 15 years, listening to my relationship drama, helping me pick out my wedding dress, and even introducing me to some of my clients when I started my business. She insisted all of that had to count for something. When I pointed out that this was just what friends do and that I'd done the same for her, she dismissed it by saying things were different now because I was rich. Then she gave me an ultimatum. When I pressed her about what would happen if I refused, she threatened to make sure everyone knew how I'd abandoned my best friend after getting rich, reminding me of her significant social media following. I left the cafe in shock. Within hours, she was posting vague but pointed stories on Instagram about fake friends and wealth-changing people. Then came the Facebook posts describing how her former best friend had forgotten her roots and abandoned those who helped her get where she is. But she didn't stop there. 3 days later, she created a GoFundMe campaign titled Standing Up Against Wealth Discrimination. The description painted me as an elitist who had forgotten my humble beginnings, complete with carefully edited screenshots of our text conversations and photos from when we were struggling students. She even had the audacity to send a link to my husband's family members, claiming she needed funds to fight for justice against our oppression. The goal? $100,000 for her emotional damages and legal fees. That's when I decided enough was enough. I had our lawyer send her a cease and desist letter regarding the defamatory posts. I also compiled all her messages, the ridiculous agreement, and her GoFundMe campaign into a single post on my own social media. The response was overwhelming. Her followers quickly turned on her when they saw the full story. The GoFundMe was taken down for fraudulent claims, and several mutual friends came forward with similar stories of her attempting to guilt them into financial support. The final blow came when one of her favorite luxury brands, which she'd been trying to partner with for years, publicly commented on my post, saying they were glad to know the truth about her character before finalizing any influencer contracts. Last I heard, she's deleted all her social media accounts and moved back in with her parents. Yesterday, I received an email from her with a new agreement, this time asking for just $1,000 monthly to help her get back on her feet. I didn't even bother responding. Sometimes I look back at our old photos and wonder if she was always like this, if money just revealed her true colors, or if social media warped her perception of reality so much that she genuinely believed she was entitled to my husband's success. Either way, I've learned that while friendship is priceless, some people will try to put a price tag on it anyway. As a construction manager used to city life, I was excited when my company offered me a promotion to lead a new suburban branch. The salary increase meant I could finally afford a house in what seemed like a peaceful neighborhood with a homeowners association. The previous owners warned me about the HOA being strict, but I'd handled difficult people throughout my career. How bad could it be? Everything was fine until Karen moved in. She bought the biggest house in the community and immediately declared herself the HOA president without any election. She simply sent letters to everyone's mailboxes announcing her appointment, claiming she had bought the position along with her house from the previous president. Her reign of chaos began immediately. She implemented necessary community standards that included mandatory lawn mowing every 36 hours and required all outdoor furniture to be officially HOA approved, which, coincidentally, could only be purchased from her newly opened overpriced store nearby. When confronted about her lack of authority, she began her most outrageous scheme, issuing fines and monopoly money. She dropped fake currency in mailboxes with handwritten violations listed on them, calling it her debt forgiveness program, where residents could pay off infractions by purchasing items from her store. I once received $500 in monopoly money for aggressive grass length and unauthorized chair possession. Things escalated when she hired people in party store police costumes to patrol the neighborhood. These fake officers would walk around with plastic badges, still bearing Party City stickers, taking pictures and distributing more monopoly money fines. Using my construction management experience, I knew documentation was crucial. I recorded everything: interactions, monopoly money fines, and photos of her fake officers. Investigation revealed she was operating her store without proper licenses and using the HOA's tax ID number without authorization. She had even been writing off her HOA presidential expenses, including printing monopoly money on her taxes. I sent the evidence to the State Attorney General's office, the legitimate HOA governing body, and local business regulators. She was served with multiple cease and desist orders. Her store was shut down, and the real HOA governing body stepped in to hold proper elections. When confronted by state inspectors, Karen ranted about discrimination and demanded to speak to their superior, only to learn she was facing serious fraud charges. Last I heard, she was trying to sell her house and leave, though finding buyers while facing fraud charges proved challenging. The HOA is now properly elected with new bylaws preventing similar situations. As for me, I kept the monopoly money as a souvenir. It's framed in my office, reminding me that truth can be stranger than fiction. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.